The rain battered Charlotte, North Carolina, on a late September evening in 2025. The kind of storm that turned uptown's polished streets into slick mirrors of neon and despair. Emily Harper, 58, stood alone in her Dilworth home, staring into the antique mirror above the foyer console. Her tailored navy dress hugged her frame, its crisp lines a quiet rebellion against the years that had softened her edges. Sapphire earrings caught the chandelier's light, glinting like the last flicker of a dying star. She'd spent an hour on her makeup, subtle, precise. The kind of effort that whispered elegance but screamed desperation to be seen. Tonight was the annual gala for David's tech firm, Pinnacle Solutions, a glittering affair at the Mint Museum, but David's words from that morning still burned in her ears. "You're not radiant enough for this one, Em. Stay home, I'll handle it." The words weren't new. They were just sharper now, a blade honed over 32 years of marriage. Emily's reflection blurred as tears welled, but she blinked them back, refusing to ruin her mascara. She wasn't crying for David. Not anymore. She was crying for the woman in the mirror, the one who'd once been called the sharpest mind in the room, by the same man who now left her behind like a forgotten coat. Their Charlotte home, a 1920s Craftsman with creaking oak floors and a wraparound porch, used to hum with life, Sarah and Nathan's laughter, David's late-night pitches, her own grading papers as a high school English teacher. Now, it felt like a museum, each room a display case for memories that no longer fit. Emily's phone buzzed on the console, a text from her daughter Sarah, 33, who lived in Raleigh with her husband and their 3-year-old son Caleb. "Mom, you at the gala? Send pics. Caleb wants to see Grandma sparkle." Emily's thumb hovered over the keyboard, her chest tightening. She couldn't tell Sarah the truth, that David had sidelined her, that she was home alone, questioning her worth. Instead, she typed, "Feeling under the weather, sweetie. Next time." She hit send, the lie settling like ash in her mouth. She turned from the mirror, her heels clicking on the hard wood as she crossed to the living room. The storm outside rattled the windows, and Emily sank onto the velvet sofa, her dress fanning out like a bruise against the cream cushions. She closed her eyes, letting her mind drift to 1993, when she was 26 and David was a 28-year-old tech sales rep with a crooked smile and boundless ambition. They'd met at an education conference in Charlotte's Convention Center, where Emily was presenting on literacy programs. David had leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching her with a grin that made her stumble over her words. After her talk, he'd approached, holding a styrofoam coffee cup, and said, "You're the sharpest mind in this room, and I'm not leaving until you let me buy you dinner." 10 months later, they were married, in her parents' backyard in Myers Park, dancing under string lights to Van Morrison's Into the Mystic. Emily wore a simple lace dress, her auburn hair loose, and David couldn't stop touching her, his hand on her waist, her cheek, her wrist. Their early years were a blur of teamwork, Emily grading essays at the kitchen table while David practiced sales pitches, her sharp edits turning his clumsy drafts into gold. At company events, he'd introduce her with pride, saying, "This is Emily, my secret weapon." She'd blush, her hand tucked in his, feeling like the center of his world. But the compliments had faded, replaced by silences that grew heavier each year. David's gaze no longer lingered. His touch was perfunctory, like checking a box. Emily had internalized it, blaming her aging body, her crow's feet, the routine of a long marriage. She'd told herself it was normal, until last year's gala, when she'd overheard David's lie. It was a dangerous moment, one that still clawed at her. She'd slipped into the ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton uninvited, hoping to surprise David and reclaim her place at his side. She'd worn a burgundy gown, her hair swept up, feeling like she could still turn heads. But as she lingered near the bar, she'd heard David's voice, smooth and casual, speaking to his boss, Laura Bennett. "Emily's not into these things anymore," he'd said, waving a hand dismissively. "She prefers staying home." The words landed like a slap, public and humiliating. Emily had frozen, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. She'd driven home that night, the Charlotte skyline blurring through her tears, and sat in her car in the driveway, her identity unraveling like a pulled thread. No. Now as the storm raged outside, Emily's fingers tightened around the sofa's armrest. Why had David erased her? Why had he hidden her contributions to his career? The late nights she'd spent refining his speeches, the ideas she'd whispered over coffee that became his biggest wins. The question gnawed at her, a curious moment that refused to let go. She stood, restless, and wandered to the hall closet, her heels muffled by the runner rug. She pushed aside old coats and a box of Nathan's childhood Legos, her hands brushing against a shoebox tucked in the corner. She pulled it out, dust coating her fingers, and opened it to find a folded letter, yellowed with age. Her breath caught as she recognized the handwriting. Laura Bennett, David's boss from his early days at Pinnacle. The letter was dated 1998, addressed to Emily. "Dear Emily, I can't thank you enough for your help with David's keynote at the Atlanta Summit. Your edits turned a good speech into a game changer. The board still talks about it. You're a hidden gem, and David's lucky to have you in his corner. Warmly, Laura." Emily's hands shook as she read it, the words a spark in the dark. She'd forgotten this letter, buried it like she'd buried so much of herself. David had never mentioned it, never acknowledged her role in his ascent. The letter was proof, her value, her impact, unseen but real. She clutched it to her chest, a quiet resolve igniting. She wouldn't let David erase her anymore. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving Charlotte's streets glistening under a pale sun. Emily stood in her kitchen, the letter hidden in her journal on the counter. She wore a vibrant teal scarf, a small act of defiance, its color bold against her cream sweater. David shuffled in, his tie loose, his face lined with the weight of a late night. "You're up early," he said, pouring coffee without looking at her. "I slept in the guest room," Emily replied, her voice steady. "Better rest." He grunted, uninterested. "Suit yourself." She watched him, searching for the man who'd once danced with her under string lights. He was gone, replaced by this stranger who dismissed her with a flick of his wrist. She didn't cook his usual eggs, instead slicing an apple for herself and eating it slowly at the counter. David didn't notice, his eyes glued to his phone. The silence between them was a chasm, but for the first time, Emily didn't try to bridge it. That afternoon, she drove to Noda, Charlotte's artsy neighborhood, where murals splashed color across brick walls and coffee shops buzzed with freelancers. She met Lisa, her oldest friend, at a cafe called Smelly Cat, its mismatched chairs and exposed pipes a far cry from the sterile gala ballrooms. Lisa, 60, with silver-streaked hair and a no-nonsense stare, leaned across the table. "You look different, Em. That scarf, it's you." Emily touched the teal fabric, a faint smile breaking through. "I'm trying to hear myself again." Lisa's eyes softened. "You just stopped, didn't you? Let him drown you out." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "I found a letter from Laura Bennett. I helped David, Lisa, more than he ever admitted." "Then why's he hiding it?" Lisa asked, her voice sharp. "What's he afraid of?" The question lingered. Another curious moment that Emily couldn't shake. She drove home, the letter's words echoing in her mind. That evening, She joined a writing group at the Charlotte Public Library's Morrison branch, a secret she kept from David. The group met in a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline twinkling beyond. Emily shared a short piece about a woman lost in her own home, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. The group listened, their nods a lifeline. Weeks passed, and Emily's small acts of rebellion multiplied. She stopped cooking David's favorite pot roast, eating salads or takeout from Amelie's French bakery instead. She opened a personal bank account at a local credit union, redirecting her pension funds from their joint account. She contacted a lawyer in South Park, transferring her Lake Norman cabin, a family heirloom from her parents, into a trust for Sarah, Nathan, and Caleb. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. But David's dismissal grew sharper, a dangerous moment looming. One evening, as Emily typed in the guest room, her journal open beside her, David knocked and leaned in the doorway. "What's with you lately?" he asked, his tone clipped. "You're too sensitive, acting like I've done something wrong." Emily looked up, her pen still. "You told Laura? I don't care about your events. You lied, David. You humiliated me." He scoffed, crossing his arms. "You're making a mountain out of nothing. You used to be tougher than this." The words cut, but Emily didn't flinch. "I used to be seen," she said, her voice low. "You don't get to decide who I am anymore." David stared, his jaw tight, then turned and left. The door clicked shut, and Emily exhaled, her heart pounding. She wrote in her journal that night, the words spilling like a confession. "I'm not invisible. I'm not done. And I won't let him bury me again." The next morning, Emily stood in her kitchen, the teal scarf draped over her shoulders. She sipped coffee from a mug Sarah had given her, its world's best grandma slogan a reminder of her worth. Outside, Charlotte hummed with life. Cars on Providence Road, joggers in Freedom Park, the city moving forward. Emily felt it too, a shift inside her, like a tide turning. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing. She was done staying home. Chapter 2. The Spark Ignites. The Charlotte air carried the crisp bite of early October 2025, the kind of weather that made Dilworth's tree-lined streets glow with amber leaves and possibility. Emily Harper stood in her home office, a converted nook off the living room, her laptop open to an email from a UNC Charlotte student. "Thank you for the essay edits, Mrs. Harper. My professor gave me an A," Emily smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had started freelance editing for local students and small businesses a month ago. Her inbox now buzzing with requests, resumes, cover letters, even a menu for a no-da food truck. Each job, paid through a new PayPal account, was a brick in the wall of her independence. Her teal scarf hung over the chair, a talisman of her quiet rebellion. But rebellion came with questions. What will David do when he notices? The thought lingered, a curious moment that prickled her skin. David, 60, was still a creature of routine. Home by 7 p.m., expecting dinner, oblivious to the shift under his roof. Emily glanced at the mantel where their 1993 wedding photo once stood, its silver frame capturing a moment when David's eyes held her like a promise. Now, a new frame sat in its place. Sarah and Nathan at the Lake Norman cabin, laughing under a summer sky, Caleb's tiny hand clutching a fishing pole. David had noticed the change last week, his brow furrowing as he set down his briefcase. "Where's our picture?" he'd asked, his tone more curious than confrontational. "In storage," Emily had replied, her voice even. "This one feels right." He'd stared at the photo, then at her, sensing a shift he couldn't name. "If you say so," he'd muttered, retreating to his study. Emily had watched him go, her heart a tangle of defiance and dread. She wasn't hiding anymore, but she wasn't ready for the storm that might follow. That evening, Emily drove to a neighborhood potluck in Freedom Park, alone. The park buzzed with Charlotte's eclectic mixes, young families, retirees, hipsters with craft beer. She wore a burgundy sweater and gold hoop earrings, her hair loose, refusing to play the dutiful wife who waited for David's arm. She carried a homemade pecan pie, its crust golden from an afternoon of baking for herself, not him. At the potluck, she laughed with neighbors, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation. When a woman asked, "Where's David?" Emily smiled and said, "Working late. I'm here for me." The words felt like a vow. Back home, the house was silent, David still at the office. Emily slipped a jazz record onto the vintage turntable, a gift from her father in the 80s. Ella Fitzgerald's voice filled the room, smooth and defiant. Emily swayed, her bare feet cool against the hardwood, her eyes closed. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was hers. She danced alone, peace settling like dust after a storm. But peace was fragile. The next morning, a dangerous moment loomed. Emily stood at the kitchen island, chopping carrots for a soup she'd eat alone. David shuffled in, his tie askew, his face etched with the strain of a looming deadline. He poured coffee, his eyes flicking to the empty spot at the table where his plate used to sit. Emily hadn't set a place for him in weeks, eating on her terms, sometimes at the counter, sometimes on the porch, savoring the freedom of choice. "You okay?" David asked, his voice gruff but probing. Emily set down the knife, her pulse quickening. "I'm drowning, David," she said, the words spilling before she could stop them. "I've been drowning for years, and you don't see it." He blinked, caught off guard. "What's that supposed to mean? I'm here, aren't I?" "Are you?" Her voice was low, sharp. "You leave me behind, lie about me, erase me. I'm not your prop anymore." David's jaw tightened, his coffee mug thudding onto the counter. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Em. Always so dramatic." He turned, dismissing her with a wave, and left for work. The door slammed, and Emily stood frozen, her hands trembling. His brush-off deepened her isolation, a wound that bled silently. She sank into a chair, her soup forgotten, and stared at the empty table. "I'm lonelier with him than alone." That afternoon she drove to Lake Norman, the cabin's trust papers tucked in her glove box, a shield against David's control. She parked near Jeton Park, where the lake shimmered under a pale sun, its surface rippling with secrets. Emily sat on a bench, her journal open, and let the tears come. They weren't for David. They were for the years she'd lost, the woman she'd buried under his neglect. A jogger passed, nodding politely, but Emily felt invisible, her pain a private storm. She wrote, "I am not broken. I am still here." The words became a mantra, inked into her soul. Back home, Emily dug through a box in the guest room, unearthing old journals from her 20s. The pages brimmed with her younger self, bold, passionate, unafraid. She'd written about dreams of publishing, of teaching abroad, of a life that wasn't tethered to someone else's ambition. Reading them, she felt a spark rekindle, a reminder of who she'd been before David's shadow swallowed her. Her rebellion grew bolder. At the Charlotte Public Library's writing group, Emily shared an essay about rediscovery, her voice steady as she described a woman waking from a long sleep. The group applauded, their faces alight with recognition. A member, a retired editor named Claire, leaned forward. "You should publish this, Emily. It's raw, real. People need to hear it." The suggestion planted a seed, its roots curling into her dreams. Emily's posture changed, her shoulders squared, her steps lighter. She wore bold colors, crimson blouses, emerald scarves, each choice a declaration. Sarah visited one Sunday, Caleb toddling behind, and noticed the shift. "You look alive, Mom," she said, her eyes warm, "like you're back." Emily hugged her, tears pricking, and felt the weight of her daughter's love. Later, Nathan, 30, texted from Asheville. "Proud, Mom." The rare gesture pierced her heart. A reminder that her children saw her, even if David didn't. But David wasn't blind. One evening, as Emily typed edits for a client, he knocked on her office door, holding a flash drive. "Need help with a presentation," he said, his tone casual but expectant. "You always make these better." Emily looked up, her fingers still. "I don't do that anymore," she said, her voice firm. "You'll manage." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Since when?" "Since I stopped being your ghostwriter." She turned back to her screen, dismissing him. David stood there, the flash drive dangling, then left without a word. The air crackled with tension, a dangerous moment brewing. Emily sensed his discomfort, his realization that she was slipping from his control. The house felt smaller, its walls closing in with unspoken threats. The storm broke a week later, a pivotal moment that shifted everything. Emily's phone pinged with an email from Laura Bennett, Pinnacle's CEO, inviting her to the company's executive dinner at the Capitol Grill in Uptown. "Your contributions to David's early work were invaluable," Laura wrote. "We'd love to have you join us." Emily's breath caught, the letter from 1998 flashing in her mind. Laura knew, she saw. Emily arrived at the dinner in a sleek emerald dress, its fitted silhouette a far cry from the navy gown she'd worn to David's gallows. Her hair was swept up, sapphire earrings glinting, her confidence a quiet fire. The private dining room buzzed with Pinnacle's elite, executives, board members, David among them. He froze when he saw her, his wineglass pausing mid-sip. Emily was seated at Laura's table, not his, a deliberate choice that sent whispers through the room. Laura stood, clinking her glass. "I want to recognize someone tonight," she said, her voice carrying. "Emily Harper, whose editing shaped David's early successes, like the 1998 Atlantic keynote that put Pinnacle on the map. Her talent was our secret weapon." The room applauded, heads turning to Emily, who smiled, her heart pounding. David's face flushed, his eyes darting as colleagues glanced his way. He stammered, trying to deflect. "We were a team, always." But the truth hung heavy, exposed. After dinner, David approached, his smile tight. "Let me walk you to your car." "I drove myself," Emily said, her voice cool. She left him standing there, her heels clicking on the marble floor, power coursing through her veins. But a question lingered, a curious moment. How will David react to this public reclamation? The answer came slowly, in shadows and silences. David grew quieter at home, his unease palpable. Emily felt his eyes on her, calculating, as if weighing how to pull her back. She pushed forward, undeterred. Laura invited her to speak at a women's leadership luncheon at the Charlotte Convention Center, themed Hidden Influence. Emily spent nights crafting her speech, her journal filling with drafts. The day arrived, and she stood before a packed room, her crimson blouse vibrant under the lights. David sat in the back, uninvited but present, his presence a test. "My influence was hidden," Emily began, her voice clear. "Not by choice, but by erasure. I edited speeches, shaped ideas, built a career that wasn't mine, but I'm done being invisible." She shared her journey, from the gala humiliation to the letter, the scarf, the writing group, each step a reclaiming of her voice. The audience leaned in, women nodding, some wiping tears. When she finished, they stood, applauding, and strangers shared their own stories of being unseen. Daisy clapped, his face unreadable, but Emily didn't care. This wasn't for him. That night, a dangerous moment erupted. David waited in the living room, his tie loosened, a whiskey glass in hand. "You made me look like a fool today," he said, his voice low. "Telling everyone I hid you." "You did," Emily replied, standing tall. "I'm not apologizing for the truth." He stepped closer, his eyes flashing. "We're a team, Em. Don't forget that. You need me." She held his gaze, unflinching. "I don't. Not anymore." She walked to the guest room, locking the door, her heart racing. His words were a trap, an attempt to drag her back to the old roles. She wouldn't go. The next morning, David tried to reconnect, his tone softer. "Let's talk, Em. We can fix this." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "No," she said. "I'm not going back. You don't get to decide who I am." She set boundaries, clear and unyielding, refusing to cook, to edit, to shrink. David's face hardened, but he didn't push. The house felt like a battlefield, each silence a skirmish. Emily returned to Jetton Park, her journal open on the same bench. The lake sparkled, its calm a mirror to her own. She wrote, "I am enough." The words anchored her, a vow to the woman she'd rediscovered. She thought of Sarah's smile, Nathan's text, Claire's encouragement, Laura's applause. Her life was hers again, not a shadow of David's. As the sun set, Emily drove home, the Charlotte skyline glowing against the dusk. She didn't know what David would do next, retaliate, retreat, or fade, but she was ready. Her rebellion had led not to confrontation, but to liberation. She was no longer drowning. She was rising, her voice a beacon, her heart a flame.